June 4, 1942, 10:22 a.m. Pacific Ocean, northwest of Midway Atoll, 5 minutes. That's all it took to change the course of World War II. In just 300 seconds. 3 Japanese aircraft carriers, veterans of Pearl Harbor, masters of the Pacific, were transformed from instruments of imperial expansion into burning wrecks. This is the story of the Battle of Midway, where intelligence, sacrifice, and a sliver of tactical fortune converged to deliver the first major defeat to the Imperial Japanese Navy. This is the story of how America turned the tide in the Pacific. War, December 7, 1941. Surprise attack on Pearl Harbor shocked America into war. 8 battleships damaged or destroyed. Over 2,400 Americans killed. The Pacific Fleet crippled. But Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, knew something crucial. He had missed the real targets. America's aircraft carriers, Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga, were at sea that day. They survived. And Yamamoto understood that in modern naval warfare, the carrier was king. In the 6 months following Pearl Harbor, the Imperial Japanese Navy seemed unstoppable. The Philippines fell. Singapore surrendered. The Dutch East Indies were occupied. Japan's carrier strike force, the Kido Butai, commanded by Vice Admiral Kiichi Nagamo, swept through the Pacific and Indian Oceans virtually unopposed. From Pearl Harbor to Ceylon, Japanese forces demonstrated a level of coordination, skill, and tactical superiority that stunned the Western powers. But on April 18, 1942, something unexpected happened. 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers, led by Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, launched from the carrier USS Hornet and struck Tokyo. The physical damage was minimal, but the psychological impact was profound. For the first time since ancient times, the Japanese home islands had been attacked. The raid humiliated the Imperial Navy and enraged Yamamoto. If American carriers could reach Tokyo, they had to be destroyed. Immediately, Yamamoto conceived Operation Ami, the invasion of Midway Atoll, a small coral island 1,300 miles northwest of Hawaii. The plan had 2 objectives: capture Midway to extend Japan's defensive perimeter, and more importantly, lure the remaining American carriers into a decisive battle where they could be annihilated. It was an ambitious gamble, and like many of Yamamoto's plans, it was complex, perhaps too complex. The operation divided Japanese forces across multiple objectives. While the main carrier strike force targeted Midway, 2 carriers, Junyo and Ryuyo, were dispatched north to attack the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. This was intended as a diversion, but it fatally weakened the main assault. Yamamoto also assumed American forces would react slowly, giving him time to occupy Midway before the U.S. carriers arrived. He estimated America had only 2 operational carriers, Enterprise and Hornet. He was wrong. At Pearl Harbor Naval Base, in a basement office codenamed Station HYPO, Commander Joseph Rochefort and his team of cryptanalysts had been working around the clock to break Japanese Naval Code JN25. By late May 1942, they had achieved a breakthrough. Intercepted messages revealed a major operation planned for early June against a target designated AF. But where was AF? Rochefort had a hunch: Midway. To confirm, he orchestrated a clever deception. He instructed Midway to send an uncoded message reporting that their water distillation plant had broken down. Days later, Japanese intelligence intercepted and reported, AF is short of fresh water. The trap worked. AF was Midway. Rochefort now knew when, where, and with what forces Japan would strike. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, faced a critical decision. Should he trust Rochefort's intelligence? Many in Washington were skeptical. But Nimitz, a calculated risk-taker, believed in his codebreakers. He would position his carriers northeast of Midway and ambush the Japanese fleet. It was America's best chance to turn the war around. But there was a problem. The carrier USS Yorktown, damaged in the Battle of the Coral Sea 3 weeks earlier, had limped back to Pearl Harbor. Engineers estimated 3 months for repairs. Nimitz gave them 3 days. In an astonishing feat of round-the-clock work, over 1,400 men swarmed the ship, welding steel plates, repairing boilers, and restoring combat systems. 72 hours later, Yorktown steamed out of Pearl Harbor. Battle-ready but fragile, Nimitz assembled his forces, Task Force 16, built around the carriers Enterprise and Hornet, commanded by Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance, and Task Force 17, centered on Yorktown, commanded by Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher. Spruance was an unusual choice, a cruiser commander with limited carrier experience. He was filling in for Admiral William Halsey, who had been hospitalized with a skin condition. But Spruance was methodical, cautious, and brilliant qualities that would prove decisive. The American carrier force comprised 3 carriers, 7 heavy cruisers, 1 light cruiser, 15 destroyers, and approximately 233 aircraft. Against them, 4 Japanese fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, carrying 248 aircraft, escorted by 2 battleships, 2 heavy cruisers, 1 light cruiser, and 12 destroyers. On paper, Japan held the advantage. In reality, America held the ace. They knew the Japanese plan. Japan did not know the American carriers were already waiting. On the morning of June 3rd, the American carriers reached their ambush position, approximately 200 miles northeast of Midway, hidden by cloud cover. Fletcher, as senior officer, retained tactical command but gave Spruance freedom to maneuver. The stage was set for the most consequential naval battle of the Pacific War. June 4, 1942, 4:30 a.m. Darkness still cloaked the Pacific as the Japanese carrier strike force approached Midway from the northwest. Admiral Nagamo, aboard his flagship Akagi, ordered the launch of the first strike wave against Midway's defenses. 108 aircraft roared off the decks, 36 Aichi D-3 Aval dive bombers, 36 Nakajima B-5 torpedo bombers armed with high-explosive bombs, and 36 A-6M0 fighters. Leading the formation was Lieutenant Joichi Tominaga. Nagamo's plan was straightforward: neutralize Midway's airfields, destroy ground defenses, then prepare to deal with any American naval forces that appeared. But he was operating under a critical assumption that American carriers were still in Pearl Harbor, days away. Japanese reconnaissance had been inadequate. 4 scout planes launched at 4:30 a.m. to search the waters northeast of Midway, but one, from the cruiser Tone, was delayed by 30 minutes due to a catapult malfunction. That 30-minute delay would have catastrophic consequences. At 5:53 a.m., Midway's radar detected the incoming Japanese strike. Air raid sirens wailed across the atoll. Every operational aircraft on the island scrambled into the Air-26 Marine fighters, a mix of obsolete F-2A Buffaloes and newer F-4F Wildcats, 4 Army B-26 Marauders, 6 Navy TBF Avengers, 11 Marine SBD Dauntlesses, and 19 SB-2U Vindicators. Midway's defenders knew they were outmatched, but they would fight. At 6:16 a.m., the two forces met 30 miles northwest of Midway. The Marine fighters, led by Major Floyd Parks, climbed to intercept. What followed was a slaughter. The F-2A Buffalo, already obsolete, was hopelessly outclassed by the Zero. The Wildcats fared slightly better, but the Marines were outnumbered and outflown. Within minutes, 15 of the 26 fighters were shot down. Major Parks was killed. Captain Kirk Armistead crash-landed, severely wounded. Only 2 Buffaloes survived. The Marines had bought time, but at a terrible cost. At 6:30 a.m., Tominaga's bombers reached Midway. Anti-aircraft fire erupted from the ground. 3-inch and 5-inch guns hammered the sky. The Japanese formation scattered, then reformed for their attack runs. Bombs rained down on fuel tanks, barracks, and the power plant. Fires erupted across the island. The Marine command post took a direct hit, but the runways, Midway's most critical asset, remained largely intact, and the island's strike aircraft were already airborne, heading toward the Japanese carriers. At 7 a.m., Tominaga radioed Nagamo. There is need for a second attack. The airfields were damaged but operational. Midway could still launch planes. This message placed Nagamo in a difficult position. Half of his strike aircraft were still on deck, armed with armor-piercing bombs and torpedoes for anti-ship operations, ready to attack American carriers if they appeared. But if Midway required a second strike, he would need to rearm those planes with fragmentation bombs for ground targets. At 7:15 a.m., the decision became more complicated. A scout plane from the cruiser Tone, the one delayed by 30 minutes, reported sight what appears to be 10 enemy surface ships, bearing 010 degrees, distance 240 miles from Midway. Nagamo's blood ran cold. American ships? Here? But were there carriers? He demanded clarification. The minutes ticked by. Nagamo hesitated. Should he rearm for a second Midway strike, or keep his planes ready for naval combat? At 7:45 a.m., the scout plane sent another message. Enemy force accompanied by what appears to be a carrier. A carrier. The moment Nagamo dreaded. But his first strike wave was returning, low on fuel, some damaged. His decks were crowded with aircraft being rearmed. He made a fateful decision: recover the Midway strike force first, then launch a coordinated attack against the American carrier. It was the logical choice. It was also the beginning of the end. Between 7:15 and 8:30 a.m., the decks of Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu became scenes of controlled chaos. Ordnance crews frantically removed torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs from aircraft, replacing them with fragmentation bombs for the second Midway strike. Then, upon hearing of the American carrier, they reversed course, removing the fragmentation bombs and reloading torpedoes. Bombs, torpedoes, and fuel lines cluttered the decks. Every safety protocol was strained. Speed took priority over caution. Meanwhile, Midway strike aircraft were attacking the Japanese fleet. At 7:10 a.m., 6 TBF Avengers and 4 B-26 Marauders launched low-level torpedo attacks. The lumbering bombers, slow and unescorted, flew straight into a wall of anti-aircraft fire and swarming Zeros. 5 of the 6 Avengers were shot down. 2 of the B-26s were destroyed. Not a single torpedo hit. One burning B-26, piloted by a dying crew, nearly crashed into Akagi's bridge before spinning into the sea. Nagamo watched, shaken but unharmed. Wave after wave of Midway-based aircraft attacked. Marine dive bombers, Army B-17 flying fortresses dropping bombs from high altitude. All failed to score a hit. The Japanese carriers maneuvered expertly. Their escorts filled the sky with flak, and Zeros shredded the attackers. By 8:30 a.m., Midway's strike power was spent. But they had done something crucial. They had bought time for the American carriers. At 8:30 a.m., Nagamo began recovering his Midway strike force. Aircraft landed, were refueled, and moved below to the hangars. The decks needed to be clear for the next launch, a massive coordinated strike against the American carrier. But the process was slow, and the decks remained vulnerable, crowded with aircraft, fuel hoses, and ordnance. At 9:18 a.m., the last plane from the Midway strike landed. Nagamo prepared to launch. He had no idea that American carrier planes were already in the air, racing toward him. At 7 a.m., over 200 miles northeast of Midway, The American carriers had launched their strike. Task Force 16's Enterprise and Hornet sent off 59 dive bombers, 29 torpedo bombers, and 20 fighters. Yorktown, delayed by recovering scout planes, launched later 17 dive bombers, 12 torpedo bombers, and 6 fighters. The American plan was to coordinate dive bombers and torpedo planes would attack simultaneously from different altitudes, overwhelming Japanese defenses. But coordination required precise navigation and timing, and in the vast Pacific, that was easier planned than executed. The strike groups became separated. Hornet's Air Group 8, led by Commander Stanhope Ring, flew on a course that missed the Japanese fleet entirely. But one squadron from Hornet refused to follow Ring, Torpedo Squadron 8, VT-8, commanded by Lieutenant Commander John Waldron. John Waldron was a half-Sioux from South Dakota, a fiery and determined leader who had studied Japanese tactics intensely. The night before, he had written a letter to his squadron. "If there is only one plane left to make a final run in, I want that man to go in and get a hit. May God be with us all." Waldron trusted his instincts over orders. When Ring turned south, Waldron turned his 15 TBD Devastators west-southwest, directly toward where he believed the Japanese fleet would be. The TBD Devastator was obsolete slow, lightly armed, and vulnerable. To launch a torpedo, it had to fly low and straight for a dangerously long distance. With a maximum speed of 115 knots and virtually no armor, it was a death trap against Zeros. But Waldron and his men had trained for this moment. At 9:20 a.m., Waldron spotted smoke on the horizon. He transmitted, "Attack immediately." 15 Devastators descended toward the sea, heading straight for the Japanese carriers. They had no fighter escort. Hornet's fighters had followed Ring. They were alone. The Japanese Combat Air Patrol, or CAP, responded instantly. Zeros dove from above like hawks. Lieutenant Commander Shigematsu Itaya led the slaughter. The first Devastator exploded mid-air. Then another. The Zeros were relentless, attacking from the sun, from behind, from the sides. Anti-aircraft fire from the Japanese ships filled the air with black bursts. Waldron's plane was hit first. Flames erupted from the fuselage. He continued flying, leading his men forward, until his Devastator disintegrated and plunged into the Pacific. He was gone in seconds. One by one, the planes of VT-8 fell. Lieutenant Raymond Moore's plane broke apart. Ensign William Evans crashed into the sea. Ensign George Gay watched as every other plane in his squadron was destroyed. His own plane, riddled with bullets, struggled forward. His gunner, Bob Huntington, was killed. Gay, alone, pressed on. He dropped his torpedo, it missed, and then his plane was hit. The Devastator crashed into the ocean. Gay survived. He inflated his life raft but stayed in the water, hiding under a seat cushion to avoid being strafed. For the next 30 hours, floating alone in the Pacific, he would witness the entire battle from a front row seat. Of the 30 men in Torpedo Squadron 8, only George Gay lived out. At 9:30 a.m., Torpedo Squadron 6 from Enterprise, VT-6, arrived. 14 Devastators led by Lieutenant Commander Eugene Lindsay. Lindsay, still recovering from injuries sustained at the Battle of the Coral Sea, had insisted on flying. Like Waldron, he had no fighter escort. Enterprise's fighters had become separated. VT-6 attacked Kaga. The Zeros swarmed again. Lindsay's plane was hit within minutes and crashed into the sea. His wingman, Ensign Severin Rombach, followed moments later. The slaughter continued. 10 of the 14 Devastators were destroyed. Only 4 survived to limp back to Enterprise. Not a single torpedo hit. At 10 a.m., Yorktown's Torpedo Squadron 3V3 arrived, led by Lieutenant Commander Lance Massey. VT-3 had an advantage, 6 Wildcat fighters escorting them. But 6 fighters against the full might of the Japanese cap was still hopeless. Massey led his 12 devastators toward Hiryu. The Wildcats fought desperately to protect them, but the odds were overwhelming. Zeros tore through the formation. Massey's plane was shot down. Lieutenant Commander Lem Massey, commanding officer of VF-3, watched helplessly as the torpedo planes were annihilated. 10 of 12 devastators were lost. In less than an hour, 41 American torpedo bombers had attacked. 35 were shot down. Not a single torpedo hit a Japanese ship. It was a massacre. And yet, these men, these brave, doomed pilots, had accomplished something extraordinary. They had not died in vain. The Japanese carriers had been forced to maneuver violently to evade torpedoes, breaking formation. The Zeros, flying at low altitude to intercept torpedo bombers, had burned through fuel and ammunition. Most importantly, the Japanese cap was entirely focused on low-altitude threats. No one was watching the sky above. At 10,000 feet, the American dive bombers were arriving, unnoticed and unopposed. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, commanding Enterprise's Bombing Squadron 6 and Scouting Squadron 6, was lost. He had launched at 7 a.m. with 33 SPD Dauntless dive bombers, following the course provided by Enterprise's plotting team. But when he reached the expected intercept point at 9:20 a.m., there was nothing, just empty ocean. McClu Sky faced a decision. His fuel was running low. He could turn back now and most of his planes would make it home. Or he could continue searching, knowing some might run out of fuel and ditch in the ocean. McCluskey chose to search. He turned northwest, following his instincts. At 10:05 a.m., McCluskey spotted a lone Japanese destroyer, the Arashi, racing northeast at flank speed. The destroyer had been depth-charging the American submarine USS Nautilus and was now hurrying to rejoin the carrier fleet. McCluskey gambled. He followed the destroyer's wake. At 10:20 a.m., he saw them 4 Japanese carriers turning into the wind, preparing to launch their strike against the American fleet. McCluskey had found them, and they had no idea he was there. At that exact moment, 15,000 feet below, the decks of Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu were scenes of organized chaos. The last of the Midway strike aircraft had been recovered. Fuel hoses snaked across the decks. Ordnance crews were loading torpedoes and bombs onto the strike planes. Pilots were climbing into cockpits. In minutes, over 100 aircraft would launch to destroy the American carriers. Najimo's staff, relieved that the American torpedo attacks had failed, allowed themselves a moment of confidence. The counterattack was imminent. Victory was within reach. No one looked up. McClu Sky split his force. He would lead Scouting 617 Dauntlesses against Kaga. Bombing 6, led by Lieutenant Dick Best, would hit Akagi, but in the confusion, most of Best's squadron followed McCluskey. Only Best and his 2 wingman ensigns, Frederick Weber and Edwin Kroger, dove on Akagi. The rest attacked Kaga. At 10:22 a.m., McCluskey rolled into his dive. From 14,000 feet, the Dauntlesses plunged nearly vertically, reaching speeds over 250 miles per hour. The wind howled. The altimeters spun. At 1,500 feet, release. The 1,000-pound bombs fell free. The first bomb struck Kaga near the island superstructure. The explosion tore through the deck and detonated in the upper hangar, where fully fueled and armed aircraft were parked. Secondary explosions ripped through the ship. A second bomb hit amidships, igniting aviation fuel. A third struck aft. Within seconds, Kaga was transformed into an inferno. Flames roared through the hangar decks. Aircraft exploded. Torpedoes cooked off. The crew fought desperately to control the fires, but it was hopeless. Captain Jizaku Okada ordered abandoned ship. Kaga, veteran of Pearl Harbor, was dying simultaneously. Dick Best and his 2 wingmen dove on Akagi. Akagi was Nagumo's flagship. The pride of the Kido Butai, Best's bomb struck just behind the midship elevator. It penetrated the flight deck and exploded in the hangar, where 18 fully armed and fueled aircraft awaited launch. The resulting blast was catastrophic. Fire erupted from the hangar, consuming aircraft, fuel, and ordnance. A second bomb from Weber struck near the port edge, blowing a massive hole in the deck. The third bomb from Kroger missed, but 2 hits were enough. Akagi's fire control systems failed. The bridge filled with smoke. Nagumo, stunned, refused to leave initially, but his staff dragged him to a small boat. The admiral's flag was transferred to the cruiser Nagara. Akagi, the symbol of Japanese naval power, burned uncontrollably. By late afternoon, the order would be given to scuttle her at the same moment. 10:25 a.m., Yorktown's Bombing Squadron 3, led by Lieutenant Commander Max Leslie, attacked Soryu. Leslie's own bomb had fallen off prematurely due to an electrical malfunction, but his 17 Dauntlesses pressed the attack. 3 bombs struck Soryu in rapid succession. 1 penetrated to the lower hangar and detonated near the forward aviation fuel tanks. The explosion was devastating. Soryu, smaller than Akagi or Kaga, couldn't withstand the damage. Fires raged through the ship. Within 20 minutes, Captain Ryusaku Yanagimoto ordered abandon ship. Yanagimoto chose to go down with his ship, lashing himself to the anchor. Soryu capsized and sank at 7:13 p.m. From 10:22 to 10:27 a.m. 5 minutes, the balance of naval power in the Pacific shifted irrevocably. 3 fleet carriers, the heart of Japan's striking power, were reduced to flaming wrecks. The crews fought heroically to save their ships, but the fires were beyond control. The very elements that made carriers powerful aviation fuel. Bombs, torpedoes became agents of their destruction. Hiryu, the 4th carrier, had been operating separately to the north and escaped the initial attack. Rear Admiral Tamon Yamaguchi, commanding Hiryu, received the catastrophic news at 10:40 a.m. Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu all hit. Yamaguchi, considered one of the brightest minds in the Imperial Navy, did not hesitate. Even alone, he would strike back. Rear Admiral Tamon Yamaguchi was 50 years old, a Princeton graduate, and widely regarded as Yamamoto's successor. Unlike Nagumo, who was cautious and defensive, Yamaguchi was aggressive and bold. Upon hearing that 3 carriers were burning, he immediately ordered a counterstrike. Hiryu would hit the Americans before they could regroup. At 10:40 a.m., Yamaguchi launched 18 Val dive bombers and 6 Zero fighters, led by Lieutenant Michio Kobayashi. Their target, the American carriers. Japanese scout planes had reported a carrier northeast of Midway. Kobayashi's orders were simple: find it, sink it. Yorktown, having recovered her strike aircraft, was reforming her combat air patrol when radar detected incoming Japanese planes at 11:59 a.m. 12. Wildcats scrambled to intercept. At 12:10 p.m., they met Kobayashi's formation 40 miles out. The Wildcats tore into the Japanese formation, shooting down 10 of the 18 Vals, but 8 broke through. Yorktown twisted and turned, her 5-inch guns barking skyward. Anti-aircraft fire filled the air. The Vals came in fast, diving through the flak. 3 bombs hit. The first struck near the island, penetrating to the 4th deck and exploding. The blast killed or wounded 66 men and knocked out the boilers. Yorktown's speed dropped from 30 knots to 6. The second bomb hit near the smokestack, igniting fires. The third exploded near the aft elevator. Yorktown listed, burning and crippled, but her damage control teams were exceptional. Within an hour, they had extinguished the fires, patched the holes, and restored power to 5 of 6 boilers. By 1:40 p.m., Yorktown was making 19 knots. To incoming Japanese scouts, she appeared operational again, They assumed she was a different, undamaged carrier. At 1:30 p.m., Yamaguchi launched Hiryu's second strike, 10 Kate torpedo bombers and 6 Zeros. Led by Lieutenant Joichi Tominaga, the same officer who had led the initial Midway attack and survived, despite his plane being damaged. Tominaga knew his fuel tank was compromised. He knew this was a one-way mission. He went anyway. At 2:30 p.m., the Kates appeared. Yorktown's crew, believing they had survived the worst, now faced a new nightmare. Torpedo attacks were deadlier than bombs. A torpedo below the waterline could break a ship's keel. The Kates split into two groups, attacking from both sides to create an anvil. Yorktown could evade torpedoes from one side, but not both. The Wildcats and anti-aircraft fire shot down 5 of the 10 Kates. Tominaga's plane was hit but pressed on, dropping its torpedo before crashing into the sea. The remaining Kates launched. 2 torpedoes struck Yorktown's port side. The explosions were massive, tearing open her hull below the waterline. Electrical power failed. Yorktown listed 26 degrees. Water flooded the lower decks. At 3 p.m., Captain Elliot Buckmaster reluctantly gave the order, "Abandon ship." The crew evacuated in good order. Destroyers pulled men from the water. Yorktown, battered but defiant, remained afloat, listing but not sinking. She would not die easily, but Hiryu's triumph was short-lived. At 2:45 p.m., a scout plane from Yorktown radioed the position of Hiryu. Enterprise immediately launched a strike. 24 Dauntlesses from Bombing Squadron. 3 orphaned Yorktown aircraft now operating from Enterprise, plus 14 from Enterprise's own squadrons. At 5 p.m., they found Hiryu. Yamaguchi had been preparing another strike when the Dauntlesses appeared. Hiryu twisted desperately, but she could not evade them all. 4 bombs hit. One struck forward, penetrating the flight deck. Another hit near the island. A third detonated in the hangar. The 4th struck aft. Like her sisters, Hiryu's hangar became an inferno. Fueled aircraft exploded. Fires spread uncontrollably. Yamaguchi refused to abandon ship. As flames consumed Hiryu, he stood on the bridge with Captain Tomio Keiku. Together, they would go down with the ship. At 2:30 a.m. on June 5th, Japanese destroyers fired torpedoes into Hiryu, sending her to the bottom. Yamaguchi and Kaku, along with 416 men, went down with her. The WWII, the most powerful carrier force ever assembled, had been annihilated on the night of June 4th. Admiral Yamamoto, aboard the battleship Yamato far to the west, struggled with the magnitude of the disaster. 4 fleet carriers lost, hundreds of aircraft destroyed, thousands of men dead. He still commanded a powerful surface force, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, but without air cover, they were vulnerable. At 2:55 a.m. on June 5th, Yamamoto issued the order, "Withdraw." Operation Me was over. Japan had lost. Admiral Spruance, now in tactical command of American forces, faced a decision: pursue or consolidate. His instincts were cautious. He knew Yamamoto still had battleships, and a night surface action could reverse American gains. At 7 p.m. on June 4th, Spruance turned his carriers east, away from the retreating Japanese. It was a controversial decision. Some called it overly cautious, but Spruance understood that preserving his carriers was more important than sinking a few more Japanese ships. Nimitz later called it the right decision. On the morning of June 5th, American search planes located 2 Japanese heavy cruisers, Mogami and Mikuma, damaged from a collision during the night withdrawal. American dive bombers swarmed them. Mikuma, crippled and burning, sank on June 6th. Mogami, heavily damaged, limped back to Japan. The photographs of Mikuma's twisted wreckage became iconic images of American vengeance, but the battle had one final, tragic chapter. On June 5th, a salvage team returned to Yorktown, still afloat and listing. Throughout the day, they worked to save her, attaching towing cables, pumping out water. By the evening of June 6th, there was hope she might be saved. Then, at 1:30 p.m., the Japanese submarine I-168, which had evaded American destroyers, fired a spread of 4 torpedoes. 2 struck Yorktown. 2 hit the destroyer USS Hammond, tied alongside. Hammond broke in half and sank in 4 minutes, killing 80 men. Yorktown absorbed the torpedo hits, shuddered, but still floated. At dawn on June 7th, Yorktown finally rolled over and sank. She had fought in the Coral Sea, been repaired in 72 hours, survived bombs and torpedoes at Midway, and defied death for 3 days. Her loss was mourning, but her sacrifice had helped secure victory. The final toll: Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, 1 heavy cruiser, 248 aircraft, and 3,057 men. America lost 1 carrier, 1 destroyer, 150 aircraft, and 307 men. But the numbers don't convey the true cost. Japan lost not just ships, but irreplaceable veteran pilots and aircrewmen who had trained for years and fought from Pearl Harbor to Ceylon. America, with its industrial might and training programs, could replace losses. Japan could not. Why did Japan lose the Battle of Midway? The question has been debated by historians for 8 decades. Some point to luck, the fortuitous timing of the American dive bombers. Others emphasize intelligence. Rochefort's codebreaking gave America a decisive advantage. Both are true, but the full answer is more complex. Japan's strategic plan was flawed from the start. Operation A tried to do too much: invade Midway, attack the Aleutians, and lure American carriers into a trap. Dividing forces across multiple objectives violated the principle of concentration of force. Had Yamamoto concentrated all 6 available carriers at Midway, the outcome might have been different. Tactically, Nagamo made critical errors. His decision to rearm aircraft for a second Midway strike, then reversed that decision upon hearing of American ships, left his carriers vulnerable at the worst possible moment. Decks crowded with aircraft, fuel, and ordnance. He also failed to maintain adequate reconnaissance. The delayed launch of Tone's scout plane meant he discovered American carriers 30 minutes later than he should have. 30 minutes that cost him the battle. Japanese carrier design also played a role. Unlike American carriers, which had armored flight decks and isolated ammunition storage, Japanese carriers prioritized offensive power over survivability. Their hangars were open to maximize aircraft capacity, but this made fires catastrophic. Once hit, Japanese carriers burned uncontrollably. America's victory was not purely luck. It was the product of superior intelligence, bold leadership, and extraordinary sacrifice. Rochefort's codebreakers gave Nimitz the intelligence to position his forces perfectly. Nimitz trusted that intelligence and committed everything to the ambush. Spruance, methodical and cautious, avoided Yamamoto's trap and preserved his carriers for future battles. And then there were the torpedo squadrons: VT-6, VT-3, who flew into certain death knowing their torpedoes would likely miss. Their sacrifice was not futile. By drawing the Japanese cap down to sea level, they created the opening for McCluskey's dive bombers. Without the torpedo attacks, the dive bombers would have faced a sky full of zeros. The men of the torpedo squadrons died so that others could cede. The Battle of Midway did not end the Pacific War. 3 more years of brutal fighting lay ahead, but it ended Japan's offensive capability. After Midway, Japan fought defensively, retreating island by island toward the homeland. America, meanwhile, unleashed its industrial might. New carriers, aircraft, and trained pilots poured into the Pacific. The war became a contest Japan could not win. Midway demonstrated the decisive role of intelligence in modern warfare. It showed that aircraft carriers, not battleships, were the dominant naval weapon. It proved that training, doctrine, and leadership mattered as much as numbers. And it reminded the world that in war, courage and sacrifice can alter the course of history. The men who fought at Midway, American and Japanese, displayed extraordinary bravery. They fought for their countries, for their shipmates, and for ideals larger than themselves. Many did not come home. Their sacrifice deserves to be remembered not as a story of triumphalism, but as a testament to the cost of war and the resilience of those who fight it. The Battle of Midway stands as one of the most decisive naval engagements in history. In the span of 5 minutes, the trajectory of World War II in the Pacific shifted. 3 Japanese carriers, symbols of imperial power, were destroyed. A 4th would follow hours later. The myth of Japanese invincibility was shattered. America, bloody but unbroken, began the long road to victory. But the true lesson of Midway is not about ships or tactics. It's about the individuals who made the difference, the codebreakers who worked in secret, the pilots who flew into overwhelming odds, the sailors who fought fires and saved ships, and the leaders who made the hard calls. War is ultimately a human endeavor, and Midway was won by human courage, ingenuity, and sacrifice. If you found this deep dive into the Battle of Midway informative, please consider subscribing to this channel. We create long-form historical content that goes beyond surface-level narratives to explore the tactics, decisions, and human stories behind pivotal moments in history. Hit the like button if you want to see more detailed battle analyses, and leave a comment below. What other World War II battles should we cover next? The Battle of the Atlantic? Stalingrad? Iwo Jima? Let us know. And if you're interested in learning more about the Pacific War, check out our video on the Doolittle Raid, which set the stage for Midway. Thank you for watching, and remember, history is not just dates and battles. It's the story of people like us, facing impossible choices and extraordinary circumstances. Until next time.